Behind the closed door of the tailor's workshop, hands explored forbidden territory, breath quickened, whispers of "we shouldn't" drowned out by desire. But what happens when the woman in those arms isn't who you think she is? What happens when the ultimate betrayal comes from the one person who should protect you? Stay with me, because this story will shake you to your core. Before we dive into this story of forbidden passion and ultimate betrayal, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. And drop a comment telling me, have you ever been betrayed by family? Let's get into it. In a bustling village where everyone knew everyone's business, there lived a man named Baba Tunde. At 70 years old, his fingers still moved with practiced precision across fabric, stitching dreams into wedding garments and funeral shrouds. His shop sat at the corner of the market square, where the scent of fresh cloth mingled with the gossip of market women. But Baba Tunde had a reputation that preceded him, a reputation that made wives clutch their husbands a little tighter, and mothers warned their daughters to stay clear of the old tailor's shop after dark. He was a womanizer. Even in his twilight years, his eyes still wandered, his words still dripped with honey, and his hands, well, his hands knew more than just the art of tailoring. His son Tunde Jr., TJ, as the village youth called him, was 42 years old and unmarried, tall, handsome, successful as a civil servant in the city, yet somehow still single. The aunties whispered. The uncles speculated. Was he impotent? Was he cursed? Was there a woman in the city breaking his heart? Nobody knew the truth, not even his father. The truth was buried deep in TJ's chest, a secret that made him watch other couples with a mixture of longing and relief, a secret that made him avoid his father's constant questions about marriage and grandchildren. "When will you bring a wife home?" Baba Tunde would ask, his voice carrying the weight of tradition and expectation. "Soon, Baba, soon," TJ would reply, knowing that soon would never come. Then everything changed when a girl named Amara walked into Baba Tunde's shop one afternoon. She was 24 years old, with skin like melted chocolate and curves that made the fabric of her wrapper cling in all the right places. She came needing a dress for her cousin's wedding. That was 6 months ago. Now she came to the shop almost every day, sometimes with fabric, sometimes with food she claimed was extra from her mother's kitchen, sometimes with nothing but a smile and time to spare. The market women noticed. They always did. "That girl spends too much time at the old man's shop," they whispered. "Maybe she's learning to sew," others defended, though their eyes told a different story. What they didn't know was that inside the shop, away from prying eyes, Amara and Baba Tunde had created their own world. It started innocently enough, a hand lingering too long on hers as he took measurements, his breath on her neck as he adjusted fabric on her shoulders, compliments that went beyond professional courtesy. "You're too beautiful for this village," he'd whisper, his aged voice still carrying charm. "And you're too old to be saying such things," she'd reply, but her smile betrayed her. Then came the day his hand traced the curve of her hip, and she didn't move away. The day her fingers brushed his chest, and he pulled her closer. The day the door locked behind them, and boundaries dissolved like sugar in rain. In that small workshop, surrounded by bolts of Ankara and lace, they discovered each other. His experienced touch knew exactly where to linger, how to make her breath catch, how to make her forget the decades between them. Her youthful energy awakened something in him he thought had died with his late wife. "We shouldn't," she'd whisper, even as her body pressed against his. "I know," he'd respond, even as his hands explored territories that made her gasp. It became routine. She'd arrive at the shop in the afternoon when business was slow. The door would lock, the curtains would close, and for an hour, the old tailor became young again, and the young woman felt desired in ways that boys her age couldn't comprehend. 3 months into their arrangement, Baba Tunde made a decision that would shatter multiple lives. One afternoon, as they lay together in the back room of his shop, he caressed her face and said, "I want you in my house. Not just here in secret, I want you as my wife." Amara's eyes widened. "Baba, I'm young enough to be your granddaughter. The village will—" "Let them talk," he interrupted, passion making him reckless. "I have a son. He needs a wife. You'll marry him, but you'll be mine. I'll provide for you, protect you, give you everything you need." "You want me to marry your son?" The absurdity should have stopped her. The immorality should have sent her running. But poverty has a way of making the impossible seem reasonable. "He's in the city. He barely comes home. You'll be my daughter-in-law officially, but truly you'll be mine. Think about it, Amara. Security, respect, money, and me." She thought about her mother's struggling food stall, her younger siblings who needed school fees, the zinc roof on their house that leaked every rainy season. "Okay," she whispered, sealing a fate that would destroy them all. 2 weeks later, TJ was at his desk in the city when his father's call came through. "My son, I have found you a wife." TJ's grip tightened on his phone. "Baba, I've told you, no more excuses." Baba Tunde's voice boomed through the phone. "You're 42 years old. I found a good girl, beautiful, respectful, from a good family. You will come home next month for the traditional wedding." "Baba, please, I'm not asking, Tunde, I'm telling you. As your father, I've made this decision. The bride price has been negotiated. The date is set. You will come home or you will disgrace me in this village." TJ closed his eyes. The secret he'd carried for decades felt heavier than ever. But how could he tell his father? How could he explain that marriage was impossible for him, that children would never come, that his body had betrayed him in ways that made traditional expectations impossible? "Who is she?" he finally asked. "Her name is Amara. You'll love her, my son. She's perfect." Perfect. The word felt like mockery. 1 month later, the village turned out in full force for the wedding. TJ arrived from the city, his face an unreadable mask as he went through the motions. He wore the traditional agbada his father had sewn, drank the palm wine presented by Amara's family, and watched as the bride was brought out, her face covered with a veil. When the veil was lifted, TJ saw her for the first time. She was indeed beautiful, young. Her eyes avoided his, and he noticed the slightest tremor in her hands. She's nervous, everyone assumed, normal for a bride. But TJ, trained by years of hiding his own secrets, recognized something else in her demeanor. Fear, guilt, the look of someone carrying a burden too heavy for her years. The ceremony concluded. They were married. And TJ made a decision that would change everything. He would watch, wait, and discover exactly what his instincts were warning him about. TJ took 2 weeks off work to settle in with his new bride. The first night he told Amara gently that he needed time, that they should get to know each other first. Relief flooded her face so completely that his suspicions deepened. During the day, he noticed how often Amara disappeared. "I'm going to check on Baba," she'd say. "He needs his medications," or "let me take him his lunch," always with food, always with care that seemed excessive for a father-in-law. TJ began to observe. He'd return home unexpectedly. He'd walk to his father's shop unannounced, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The way his father's hand lingered on Amara's waist, the way she smiled at him, not the dutiful smile of a daughter-in-law, but something else, something intimate, something that made TJ's stomach turn. The first time TJ walked into his father's shop unannounced, he found Amara massaging his father's shoulders, her hands moving with practiced familiarity. "What's going on here?" TJ's voice was sharp.
"Your father's shoulders are stiff from sewing," Amara explained quickly, stepping back. "I'm just helping." "She's a good girl, your wife," Baba Tunde added, his eyes not quite meeting his son's. But TJ saw the flush on Amara's cheeks, the way his father's shirt was slightly unbuttoned, the door that had been locked from inside.
Days passed, and the incidents multiplied. TJ would find them in the back room of the shop, speaking in whispers. They'd jump apart when he entered. "Just discussing family matters," his father would explain. "What family matters need to be discussed in secret?" TJ demanded. "You're being paranoid," Amara said, but her voice shook. Each confrontation was met with excuses. Each excuse made TJ more certain of the horrible truth. But he had no proof, just instinct, just the growing certainty that his father had trapped him in a marriage for his own selfish purposes. After 2 weeks of watching and suspecting, TJ told everyone he needed to return to the city for work. But instead of staying there, he spent his time researching, planning, and shopping for one specific item: a wireless camera disguised as a clock. He returned to the village with the small package hidden in his bag. "I bought this for Baba's room," he told Amara casually, "to monitor him in case he needs help at night, at his age." Amara's face paled slightly, but she nodded. "That's thoughtful." TJ installed it in his father's bedroom, angling it perfectly to capture the entire room. Then he connected it to his phone, told everyone he was going to a meeting in the neighboring town, and waited. He didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, while TJ sat in a hotel room in the next town, his phone buzzed with a motion alert from the camera. His hands trembled as he opened the app. There, in crystal clarity, was the truth he'd suspected but hoped wasn't real. His father and his wife, together in ways that made TJ's eyes burn with tears. The tenderness between them was undeniable. The passion was real. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was practiced, familiar, intimate. They moved together like long-time lovers, not like people committing a momentary indiscretion. His father's hands explored her body with the confidence of repeated encounters. Her responses showed comfort, pleasure, and a connection that came from months, not moments. He watched for barely a minute before turning off the video. He'd seen enough. He had his proof. Now he had to decide what to do with it. He sat in that hotel room for hours, his mind a storm of emotions. Betrayal didn't even begin to cover what he felt. His father, the man who should have protected him, guided him, loved him, had instead used him as a cover for his own lust, had married him off to his own concubine, forcing TJ into a sham marriage while knowing his son's secret struggle with intimacy. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. His father had weaponized his most vulnerable secret, his deepest shame, to facilitate his own illicit affair. TJ drove back to the village that evening, his face a mask of calm that hid the rage burning beneath. He didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, he became cold, distant. He watched them with eyes that had lost their innocence, and they felt his gaze, but couldn't understand the change. "What's wrong with you?" Amara asked one evening, genuine concern in her voice. "Nothing," TJ replied, his voice empty. "Nothing at all." He began making plans, quiet plans. Plans for when the perfect moment would come to reveal the truth and burn their world to ashes. He saved multiple copies of the video evidence. He documented dates and times. He waited like a hunter watching prey, knowing that patience would make his revenge all the more devastating. 3 months passed. 3 months of TJ playing the role of the oblivious husband while watching his wife and father continue their affair with growing boldness. They thought they'd gotten away with it.
They thought his coldness was just adjustment to marriage life. They had no idea he was building a case against them, brick by brick, evidence by evidence. Then one evening, Amara came to TJ with tears in her eyes and news that should have brought joy. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. The village erupted in celebration. Finally, the 42-year-old man would have a child. Baba Tunde was ecstatic, throwing a party, praising God and ancestors for the blessing. He hugged his son with tears of joy. He embraced Amara and called her the blessing of his old age. But TJ remained silent, unnaturally silent. And in that silence, both Amara and his father began to feel the first tendrils of fear. Amara pulled TJ aside at the party. "You're not happy?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Shouldn't I be?" he replied, his eyes boring into hers. "Shouldn't I be thrilled about this miracle?" The way he emphasized miracle made her blood run cold. 1 week after the pregnancy announcement, TJ made his move. He called a family meeting. He invited the elders of the village. He invited Amara's parents. He invited the key members of the community. His father sensed something wrong, but couldn't refuse without seeming suspicious. They gathered in Baba Tunde's compound on a sunny afternoon. The atmosphere was festive at first. Everyone expected TJ to announce plans for the baby's naming ceremony, perhaps to ask for blessings from the elders. Women had prepared food. Children played in the compound. It felt like a celebration. They had no idea they were about to witness a funeral. TJ stood before the assembled crowd, his face carved from stone. "I have an announcement to make," he began, his voice steady and clear. "My wife is pregnant." Murmurs of congratulation rippled through the crowd. People smiled and nodded. "But the child isn't mine." The smiles froze. The murmurs died. Complete, suffocating silence filled the compound. "TJ, what are you saying?" His father stood up from his chair, his face a mixture of confusion and rising panic. "I'm saying," TJ's voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the compound, "that I am impotent. I have been since birth, a medical condition that has robbed me of the ability to father children. This is why at 42 years old, I never married. This is the secret I've carried my entire life, the shame that has followed me like a shadow." Gasps filled the compound. Amara's face drained of all color. Her mother let out a small cry. "So, when my wife," TJ's voice dripped with bitter irony on that word, "tells me she's pregnant, I know with absolute certainty that I am not the father. It is medically, physically impossible." "This is madness," Baba Tunde shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You're lying. You're trying to disgrace your innocent wife. This is some scheme." "Innocent?" TJ's laugh was sharp and humorless. He pulled out his phone, and the movement made several people lean forward with curiosity. "Should I show everyone just how innocent she is? Should I show them the recordings from the camera in your room, Baba?" Baba Tunde's face went from angry red to ash gray in an instant.
"Should I show them?" TJ continued, his voice rising with emotion he could no longer contain. "How you and my wife have been lovers long before you trapped me in this marriage? Should I show them the footage from 2 weeks ago, from last month, from the day after you forced me into this wedding?" The phone shook in TJ's hand as he held it up. "Should I show them how the woman you called a good girl was actually your concubine? How you made me marry your lover so you could continue your affair under the cover of family? How you used your own son as a shield for your lust?" "No, no." Baba Tunde's hand clutched at his chest. His breathing became labored. "Yes, Baba, I know everything.
I've watched everything. The massages that were more than massages, the private meetings in locked rooms, the tender touches, the intimate moments. I have hours of footage. I've documented every betrayal." TJ's voice broke slightly, the pain finally showing through his anger. "The child in her womb is yours, not mine. Your grandchild is actually your child. Your daughter-in-law is your concubine. What you've done isn't just adultery. It's an abomination against family, against nature, against everything our people hold sacred." "TJ, please." Amara reached for him, tears streaming down her face, her whole body trembling. "Please, let me explain." He stepped back as if her touch would burn him. "Explain what? How you seduced an old man for money? How you agreed to marry his son while planning to continue sleeping with the father? How you carried on this deception for months, looking me in the eye every day while sharing his bed every chance you got?" The crowd was in shock. Some women had covered their mouths in horror. Men stood frozen, unable to process what they were hearing. Amara's father had collapsed onto a bench, his face in his hands. Baba Tunde stumbled backward, his hands still clutching his chest. I can't breathe," he gasped out, his voice barely audible. "I did it for you," he said very quietly. "I thought you weren't getting married. I thought if I gave you a wife." "You thought you'd give me your woman?" TJ shouted. "You thought you'd solve your son's problem by trapping him in your sick arrangement? You knew about my condition, didn't you? You knew I confided in Mama before she died. She told you, didn't she?" Baba Tunde's eyes widened with guilt, confirming TJ's accusation. "You knew I couldn't be a husband to any woman, and you used that knowledge to imprison me in a marriage with your concubine. You counted on my shame, my silence, my inability to expose the truth without exposing myself. That's why you pushed so hard for this wedding. That's why you wouldn't take no for an answer." TJ's voice was shaking now, years of pain pouring out. What kind of father does that to his son? What kind of man puts his own lust above his child's well-being? "Baba!" someone called out in alarm. Baba Tunde swayed on his feet, his breathing becoming more erratic. His left arm dropped limply to his side. I'm sorry," he whispered, though whether to his son, to God, or to the crowd, no one could tell. Then his knees buckled. He collapsed, his body hitting the red earth of the compound with a thud that echoed in the stunned silence. "Baba!" Several people rushed forward. Someone called for the village doctor. Others tried to revive him, loosening his clothing, fanning his face. TJ stood rooted to his spot, watching his father's collapse with eyes that showed no panic, no concern, but only cold satisfaction mixed with agony. Amara had fallen to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands wrapped around her belly. "Get the doctor!" someone screamed. But as the minutes passed and Baba Tunde's breath grew shallow and irregular, everyone understood. The shock, the public shame, the exposure of his deepest sins, it was too much for his old heart. His body couldn't withstand the weight of his guilt being laid bare before the entire community. The doctor arrived 15 minutes later, but by then, Baba Tunde's breath had stopped. The respected elder, the talented tailor, the man who had sewn wedding clothes for half the village, was dead. He died there in his compound, surrounded by the scandal he'd created, his eyes fixed on his son's face, a face that showed no forgiveness, no mercy, but only cold, devastating truth. The doctor confirmed what everyone already knew. He's gone, heart attack probably brought on by the shock. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some women wailed, men argued. Amara's parents tried to drag their daughter to her feet, but she was hysterical, her cries echoing across the compound. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to happen. He said it would be okay. He said no one would get hurt." But her apologies fell on deaf ears. The community's eyes had turned cold. What she'd done, what they'd both done, was unforgivable. TJ turned to leave the compound, his duty done, his truth told. "Where are you going?" one of the elders called out. "Your father." "He's not my father anymore," he said without turning around. "He stopped being my father the day he made me marry his concubine." Amara scrambled to her feet and ran after him, grabbing his arm. "TJ, please, I know I was wrong, but he's dead. Don't you feel anything? Don't you care that your words killed him?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she flinched at what she saw in his eyes. "My words didn't kill him. His sins did. His guilt did. The weight of what he'd done finally crushed him, as it should have." "But the baby," she sobbed, her hand on her belly. "Your baby," he corrected coldly. "His baby, not mine, never mine. That child is the physical evidence of his betrayal, and you'll have to live with that knowledge every day for the rest of your life." With that, TJ pulled his arm free and walked out of the compound. Behind him, Amara collapsed again, her wails following him down the path. He didn't look back. He didn't cry. He simply walked, one foot in front of the other, away from the devastation he'd unleashed. The news spread through the village like wildfire. By nightfall, everyone knew. The respected Tailor, the elder of the community, had committed the ultimate betrayal. He'd married his own concubine to his son, made a mockery of marriage and family, and died from the shame of his exposure. Amara's family went into hiding, unable to face the community. The girl herself gathered what few belongings she could carry and fled in the darkness. Some said she went back to her mother's village. Others claimed she had fled to the city to escape the judgment. No one knew for sure, and no one really cared. She'd become a pariah, a cautionary tale, a name mothers would whisper to warn their daughters about the consequences of greed and immorality. The marriage was dissolved by the elders the next day. The pregnancy became the village's greatest scandal in living memory, and Baba Tunde's body lay in his house, waiting for burial. But that's where the next chapter of this tragedy began. The morning after his father's death, the elders came to TJ. He'd spent the night at a friend's house, unable to return to the home he'd shared with Amara, unwilling to stay in his father's compound. "You must bury your father," the eldest among him told him, his voice firm but not unkind. "He was wrong, yes, gravely wrong, but he was still your father. Tradition demands that a son bury his father with honor." TJ looked at the group of old men, these pillars of the community who'd known him since he was a child. Tradition, his voice was quiet but intense. He violated every tradition when he did what he did. He committed an abomination against me, against our family, against everything sacred. And you want to talk to me about tradition? "He was still your father," another elder began. "He stopped being my father the day he made me marry his concubine." TJ shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. Tears streamed down his face, not tears of grief, but of rage and pain. "But the burial. Bury him outside the village," TJ said, his voice breaking. "At the crossroads, in the bush, I don't care. But he will not be buried in our family compound. He will not receive the honors of a respected elder. He will not have the ceremonies and prayers reserved for men who lived with integrity." One of the elders stepped forward. "TJ, my son, I understand your pain. What your father did was unconscionable. But to deny him proper burial, this will mark your soul. This will follow you forever. The ancestors. TJ's bitter laugh cut him off. "What about what he did to me? Does that not matter? Do I not matter? He knew about my condition. My mother told him in confidence before she died, hoping he'd be understanding, hoping he'd support me. Instead, he filed that information away like a tool he could use later. And when he wanted to marry off his lover, he pulled out that tool and used it against me. He forced me into a marriage knowing I would struggle with intimacy, knowing I would carry shame about not being able to consummate it properly, knowing I would be too humiliated to talk about my problems. He counted on my silence. He weaponized my vulnerability. Do you understand what that feels like? To realize your own father saw your deepest wound and thought, how can I use this for my benefit? He didn't protect me. He didn't support me. He didn't love me. He used me like a tool, like a convenient cover for his lust." The elders were silent, many of them with tears in their own eyes. What he did wasn't just adultery, TJ continued, his voice now hoarse. It was calculated, premeditated betrayal of his own son.
He looked at my pain and saw opportunity. He married me to a woman he was sleeping with, knowing she would be in our home, knowing they could continue their affair right under my nose, knowing I would be too ashamed of my own condition to question why my new wife might not be interested in me. And you want me to bury him with honor? TJ wiped his face with a sleeve. You want me to stand before this community and lie? To pretend he was a good father? To perform rituals that say he deserves respect in the afterlife? It's not about what he deserves, one of the elders said gently. It's about what you deserve. The peace that comes from fulfilling your duty. The closure. There is no closure from this, TJ interrupted. There is no peace in honoring a man who destroyed me. Let him be buried as what he was, a man who chose lust over love, pleasure over principle, his own satisfaction over his son's well-being. Let him be remembered for what he did, not for some false honor he doesn't deserve. The elders tried to reason with him for hours, but TJ wouldn't budge. Finally, they left, their faces heavy with the weight of an impossible situation. The village became divided. Some sided with TJ. The boy is right, they said in hushed tones at the market. What the father did was unforgivable. How can you betray your own child like that? And not just any betrayal. He used the boy's medical condition, his deepest shame, as a weapon. That's evil, pure evil. Others defended tradition. He was wrong, terribly wrong, but he's still his father. Blood is blood. The son must forgive. The son must bury him properly, or both their souls will be cursed. Mothers debated it while cooking. Imagine, one woman said, stirring her pot with vigor, knowing you can never father children, carrying that shame your whole life, afraid to marry because of it, and then your own father, forces you into marriage just so he can keep sleeping with the woman? It's not just wicked, it's demonic. But to let him die without proper burial, another countered, shaking her head, that condemns the man's soul to wander forever. It's too harsh. Yes, he was wrong, but death should bring forgiveness. The boy is letting his rage destroy him. Men argued about it in the palm wine bars. If my father did that to me, I'd refuse to bury him too. You don't betray your child like that. You just don't. There are lines you don't cross, and he didn't just cross the line, he obliterated it. But he's being too harsh. The man is dead. The man paid for his sins with his life. Isn't that enough? Now he wants to punish him even in death? Where does it end? The debate raged for days. Baba Tunde's body remained in his house, unburied, as the village struggled with the moral complexity of the situation. The heat made it urgent. He needed to be buried soon, but tradition said his son must give permission
and participate. Without TJ's involvement, the burial couldn't proceed properly. On the third day, a delegation of elders came to TJ again. This time, they brought the village priest. TJ, the priest said, his voice heavy with authority and compassion, I've prayed on this matter. What your father did was a grievous sin against you and against our traditions. No one disputes that. But you must understand, by refusing to bury him, you're not just punishing him, you're punishing yourself. How? TJ asked flatly. By chaining yourself to this anger forever, the priest explained. By letting his betrayal define the rest of your life. Burial is not about honoring the dead. It's about releasing the living. It's about saying, this chapter is over.
I release you to the ancestors, and I release myself to move forward." TJ was quiet for a long moment. And if I don't want to release him? If I want him to carry the weight of what he did even in death? "Then you'll carry it too," the priest said, gently. "That's how it works. The chains that bind him will bind you. Your anger will become your prison." Maybe I'm willing to accept that. Maybe some things are too evil to forgive. Maybe some betrayals are too deep to move past. Maybe he should be remembered for exactly what he was, a man who violated his own son in the worst possible way. The priest sighed deeply. "I cannot force you, but I beg you to reconsider. Not for him, for yourself." After they left, TJ sat alone for hours, wrestling with the decision. Part of him wanted to give in, to take the easier path, to let the burial happen and try to move on. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw that video footage. He saw his father and his wife together. He remembered the feeling of betrayal so profound it had made him physically sick. He remembered the years he'd spent alone, afraid to pursue relationships because of his condition, and how his father had known about that fear and weaponized it. Finally, 5 days after Baba Tunde's death, the elders made a decision without TJ's blessing. They couldn't let the body decompose any longer. They buried Baba Tunde in a corner of the village cemetery, not in the family plot where his ancestors lay, but not at the crossroads like TJ had demanded either. A compromise that satisfied no one. The burial was quiet. Few people attended. There were no elaborate ceremonies, no big feast afterward, no celebration of his life. It was a burial marked by shame and scandal. A funeral that felt more like hiding evidence than honoring the dead. They invited TJ. He didn't come. They sent messengers. He ignored them. On the day of the burial, he stayed in his friend's house, and when someone came to tell him his father had been laid to rest, TJ simply nodded and said nothing. 3 weeks later, TJ packed his belongings from the house he'd briefly shared with Amara. He said goodbye to the few friends he had in the village. He visited his mother's grave one last time. She died when he was 25, never knowing the full extent of the betrayal her husband would later commit. "I'm sorry, Mama. You know I told him about my condition in confidence, hoping he'd be understanding. You never imagined he'd use it against me. That's not your fault. None of this is your fault." Then he left the village. Not just left, fled. He went to a different city, far from his old job, far from anyone who knew his story. He changed his name legally, becoming someone new, someone without this history, someone who could maybe, someday, heal from wounds that felt permanent. But the question followed him. It followed him in his dreams. It followed him in quiet moments. It followed him whenever he saw fathers and sons together, whenever he passed a tailor shop, whenever he heard wedding music. Was he right to refuse to bury his father with honor? Was his rage justified? Or had he gone too far? Had he let his pain turn him into someone as cruel as the man who had betrayed him? Some nights, TJ would lie awake in his new apartment in his new city, staring at the ceiling, remembering his father's face as he collapsed. The shock, the shame, the pain. The way his hand had reached out, perhaps for forgiveness, perhaps just for help. TJ never reached back. He'd stood there, cold as stone.
Until then, remember this: blood doesn't earn loyalty. Character does. and some betrayals are simply unforgivable. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this. Will come your way more often.